Since I'm new to the platform and I have a lot of varied interests and opinions, I'm going to switch lanes from gaming to writing for this video. To start off, I want to make sure that I say I appreciate you showing up to watch this and I hope that you do enjoy it. Whereas my last video was more of an opinion piece, this one is going to be more along the lines of informative or investigative. Today I'm going to be talking about your favorite medium. That's right, you. Fanfiction. An infinite source of fantasy novel-length Sasunaru fics where the characters either take longer to fall in love than a sitcom or fall in love faster than your favorite porno. You see, fanfiction, although seen as more of a seedy medium in the past, is actually super prevalent in modern media. Many published authors started off writing or have written fanfiction in the past. I'm looking at you, 50 Shades of Questionable Consent. But it hasn't always been this way. You see, fanfiction as a concept is actually relatively modern and directly involves creative copyright law. In fact, you could say fanfiction only exists today because of capitalism. All jokes aside, the first iteration of fanfiction might actually be familiar to you. Sherlock Holmes was the first to receive its own fanfiction. In the late 1800s, Sherlock Holmes was running as a serial, which if you don't know, was a monthly or weekly iteration of a story published in a magazine. In fact, in the time period, most novels were actually published chapter by chapter before being fully published as a novel. There are debated to be a few reasons why Sherlock Holmes became the target of the first fanfiction. Some would argue that it's because Sherlock and Watson deserved to be together, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was too much of a pussy to make two men kiss. Personally, I think that Watson is bisexual and has a crush on Sherlock, but Sherlock is asexual and has no fucking clue what's going on. And although the Sherlock-Watson pairing seems like a compelling reason for the original fanfiction, it was likely more so a combination of other things. First is that Sherlock Holmes was one of the first serials to follow two characters, but stick to a more short story format. In fact, within the short stories, they even refer to cases that were never published. Second is that the writing is pretty inconsistent. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle directly contradicts himself, both within the context of the story and thematically with his own writing on multiple occasions. In fact, Watson has an injury that goes from his leg to his back to his leg, then to his shoulder throughout the duration of the series. And third is that Doyle ended the series semi-abruptly. He didn't like how formulaic his series was becoming and felt like he could move on to greater things, but he brought it back due to popular demand. Now, looking at the combination of these things, it creates a bit of a perfect storm for the audience. A set of characters that the readers feel directly connected to, inconsistencies in the themes of the stories being written, a semi-formulaic set of stories, a set of stories that feels like it has more potential than is being used, a massive gap of time where we have no idea where the characters were or what they were doing. And lastly, direct audience control over the series itself. This last one I think is actually super important. This was unheard of at the time. The audience having some form of control or interaction with the author was something that never really happened.
Max, look! Those idiots don't even know where we live!
And in doing so, he lost control of his own characters and gave the audience some control in the trajectory of the stories. But the reason that we know why this is likely the first instance of fanfiction is actually pretty interesting. You see, there was a Sherlock Holmes fan club called the Sherlock Society. And to get in, you had to submit your own Sherlock Holmes story that demonstrated that you understood the formula, but also knew how to improve on it. Now, this is a far cry from the Sherlock Watson love stories we've all come to cherish. In fact, most of these stories were basically new cases for Sherlock to work within the established universe, or they were cases that were directly mentioned and written out by the fans and audience. And before we go further into talking about the great-grandparent fics of your favorite Harry Potter fanfiction where all the characters are trans just to stick a middle finger at J.K. Rowling, it would ironically be extremely easy to be trans in a world created by a raging transphobe. Now I'm going to get a little bit into my claim that fanfiction is a creation of capitalism. To start off, I'm going to create a definition for fanfiction. Fanfiction is the use of a world or characters developed by someone else by someone who is unrelated to the source material. This might seem pretty basic to you, or maybe not, but it is important to set this up in advance. Now, what if I were to tell you that humans have been doing this since the dawn of civilization? I know it's not really a crazy claim, but it is an interesting one to think of the connotations of. You see, one of the earliest examples of this that I can think of is the tale of King Arthur. You see, the legend of King Arthur is one you're likely familiar with. Sword in rock, boy pulls sword out of rock, boy become king, defends Britain from external invaders, dies in civil war. Say hello to the new monarchy! What if I told you that the folklore created around King Arthur was not all part of the original tale? This folklore was a love triangle between Queen Guinevere, Sir Lancelot, and King Arthur that brought about the Civil War that ended the original legend of King Arthur. Man, people simp for love triangles, even back then. This gets even more interesting if we think about oral storytelling. It was unlikely that an oral storyteller was going to tell a story beat for beat the exact way that the original creator told it. And if we think about it a little bit more closely, oral storytelling really doesn't lend itself to an idea of owning stories. And oral storytelling was the predominant way that we told stories for thousands of years. And looking at stories in this way, it is unlikely that an orator would avoid creating or changing stories that were given to them by others. Hell, Shakespeare made most of his plays based off of his contemporaries. And I'm not talking ones you've likely never heard of. I'm talking Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Macbeth, Othello. In fact, I believe that if people have been doing this naturally, taking stories that they've heard and changing them to fit their contemporary ideals or to go more in line with their beliefs, then why is it something that was ridiculed for such a long time? Hell, the Bible shares tales with the Epic of Gilgamesh. And this is where capitalism comes. Capitalism is all about consolidation of wealth and ownership. Basic ass shit, I know, but sometimes it's hard to pull our minds out of this late-stage capitalist nightmare we live in. If entertainment is a medium capable of producing wealth, then it is important in a capitalist society to maintain or acquire ownership of your stories.
Money!
This is where my claim about fanfiction comes in. These stories are written about characters that are owned by people who do not own them, correct? That is the basic definition, but this is where things get tricky. When ownership of franchises change, people change the material that they receive. We don't consider this fanfiction, even though the original author of the series is not the one changing the material. I'm talking Game of Thrones. I'm talking the train wreck that is The Witcher Season 3. I'm talking the Hobbit movies. I'm talking fucking Marvel. Disney, for the love of God, I'm poor and I can't.
FBI, open up!
Now, things get a little bit more confusing here, right? You can change a story and its characters, use them as long as you gain or retain ownership. What is being said is that you can change a story, use its characters or its world as long as you have ownership of its characters, right? Well, no. You only need permission from the entity that holds ownership over that IP. Okay, so you get permission from the owner of the story or franchise to add to its story or characters, right? Well, not exactly, because as long as you are not infringing on the income of the entity that owns that franchise, then you are in the green. So, you can make money off of a franchise that you do not own as long as you can argue that you are not detracting from the income that that franchise would be making by selling something that they do not provide. This is especially interesting because there's another form of fan writing I haven't talked about yet called pastiche. With pastiche, you can write within a franchise as long as the copyright has expired. This makes it so that you can publish and make money off of a franchise that is previously established because nobody technically owns it and it's currently free license.
It's free real estate.
That's a lot, huh? See, this is where copyright law makes owning stories extremely difficult. Stories are something that are hard to own. Do you own a character, or can somebody use a version of that character in their own writing and change the name? Is it still their character? Is it your character? Where do the lines get drawn here? Within fan writing communities, there are original characters that are created by the fan writers, uninvolved with the original series, that are used by other authors. There are narratives that pop up time and time again because it was in a major piece of flagship fan writing, and these are just parts of fan writing in general. But now that I've gone on my mouth-frothing rant about why capitalism and stories is confusing, let me get back into the more fun and interesting history of fanfiction. So we were talking about how the original IP to receive its own fanfiction was Sherlock Holmes. At the time, most of the fan fiction that was being written was delivered in a transactional basis. It was a personal thing that you delivered to someone you liked and you knew was interested. This makes sense considering how hard it would be to get a publisher to take your gay porn seriously. But despite the limited distribution of fan fiction, there was still a community of people that wanted to share their stories within the franchise. Now, as time went on, it became available for you to buy a personal printing press for your home. Although it was still expensive, it was an attainable option.
Vincent. Yeah, we happy.
This was huge for the distribution of fan writing because it created an avenue for the distribution of and receiving of fan writing. People could create their own small publications and send out ads for them in the local newspaper. This was actually the sole reason that H.P. Lovecraft was able to even distribute most of his stories at all. He had his own printing press and was only officially published a few times in his life. Maybe this was karma for him being a racist, anti-Semitic piece of shit who ironically married a Jewish woman who then divorced him within 2 years. Now, aside from his extremely unbased opinions, not only did this man write papers on why America should be a monarchy, he was also so racist that he wrote multiple papers on why people of color were genetically inferior. And his somewhat problematic subject matter, H.P. Lovecraft was a major proponent of creating zines, as well as a major part of the creation of multi-author worlds and stories. Now, if you don't know, zines are a small publication funded by fans and distributed only to the people who helped fund its creation. At around the same time that Sherlock Holmes was blowing up overseas, H.P. Lovecraft was creating and fostering a small community of writers who were corresponding with one another via stories written in each other's worlds. This eventually developed into small publications with little profit, developed by those who were especially passionate about the cosmic horror genre that H.P. Lovecraft had pioneered. These zines would develop between the 1910s and 1950s to 60s, where Star Trek would make them blow up. Now, Star Trek was far from the only franchise receiving attention from these publications, but it was by far the most prevalent. This period in time was the beginning of fan content and writing as we know it. But many people have hypothesized as to why this is. This period in time was the beginning of fan writing and content as we know it. Many people have hypothesized as to why, and after having read multiple papers on it, I've come to a bit of my own conclusion. One theory in particular really stuck out to me. It talked a little bit about how the technological availability combined with live air times made it so that people were more likely to have social interactions over these specific shows. People would get together for allotted time slots and watch their favorite show together. Along with this, there was also the availability of VHS recording. Recording and rewatching your favorite show made it so people were able to be more critical and more aware of what was going on. In doing this, they were able to consume the media in a more active sense. The accessibility of content alongside the nature of a show that took itself more seriously really invited people to be more critical and interact more with the medium. Zines became more and more common, produced in homes by avid fans, curated content for those who were like-minded. People would research where they could find more fans of the series. They would communicate at large conventions and network for these zines. These zines became so prevalent that they began to have hyper-specified content just so that they could stick out. Zines that were only for romance, only for action, only for true to the story, or only for explorative. Going back to the theory as to why fan writing exploded, the theory had one major part of it that I think was extremely important. It claimed people fan write for a combination of reasons. First and foremost is their own personal investment in the series. Now this one's obvious, but still important. The next is that people fan write to be critical of the content they're invested in. This one's a little less obvious, but let's look at it this way. Every fan writer is changing something about the original series. This is an unavoidable part of writing within the confines of someone else's IP. But what this means is that every piece of fan writing is making some kind of argument or critical claim about the original content they are using. Now this is huge. After I read it, I had a bit of an epiphany. When you really think about it, every time that you change a story, you're arguing that that story would be better if that addition was part of it. No matter how problematic, all those Omegaverse writers are claiming that the world would be a better place if you were genetically predisposed to be a bottom by shitting lube out your ass. On a more serious note, if you look at fanfiction with this in mind, you start to see a bit of a trend. Most fan writing changes the focus of the series from the story to the characters. This may be semi-obvious, but it shows something about what people want or wanted from these shows. It shows that people wanted characters with dark emotional struggles that felt like real people. People they could connect to regardless of their wacky sci-fi world. Or sometimes they just wanted two hot people to fuck. And the last part of this is fan content is about the community. You're creating a community of people who are like-minded, who enjoy the same things as you do, who you can talk about things that you appreciate. And if we think about the fact that fan writing creates critical claims, then you're sharing your opinions about the world through a series that you love, whether they be emotional or horny. As early as the beginning of this fan writing, we saw two versions of these communities. Those sanctioned by the creator, like in H.P. Lovecraft, or those sanctioned by the fans, like in Sherlock Holmes. But what about a weird middle ground? Established authors writing within the IP of another established author. This is something important enough that I at least thought it was worth mentioning in this video. You know all those books that are written within the world of another's IP? The Star Wars novels, the Warhammer novels, they're written by authors unrelated to the original source material. But what's interesting is that these books are neither pastiche nor fan writing. In fact, they're considered to be the canon of the worlds they inhabit. This is where the corporate adoption of folklore or fan writing comes in. Because they officially sanctioned it, it's an acceptable medium for these authors. Lastly, I'll list some major authors who have published pastiche. Neil Gaiman, Jane Austen, Ian McEwan, works such as Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies, Terry Pratchett, the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, and so much more. Let me know if you were interested or if there was anything you were confused by in the comments. Let me know about any pastiche you know or love. And please, if you liked it, drop a follow and a like. I'm working on more essay subjects like this, so keep an eye peeled, see if there's anything new. But thank you again.